Okay.
All right, you're live.
Hi, good evening to everyone. My name is Wendy McNeil, and I'm the chair of the Undoing Racism education team here at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation at Montclair. And I welcome you to tonight's book signing and discussion with Barbara Crain Majors and Joseph Barndt. This congregation is celebrating a 125-year anniversary, and during that time, this wonderful place has been bending the proverbial arc towards justice. And one of the things that we did back in 1992 was form a partnership of sorts with the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. And that is a national organization whose primary duty is to undo the evils of racism. And one person who has been at the forefront of this movement and working with the People's Institute is someone I am so fortunate to call my colleague and my friend, Jane Gardner. She has spent her life working against racism. And so with that, I would like to introduce to you a woman I hold dear to my heart, Jane Gardner.
All right, welcome everybody. It's great to see so many people here in person, and I know there's a lot of people online. So I'm Jane Gardner, and I've had the great privilege of being a member of the Undoing Racism team since its inception in 1992. That year, as the people who joined this small group to call attention to the racial injustices in the Montclair area, there were wise persons on the committee who sought and found the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. We figured out how to contract with them to facilitate the Undoing Racism and Community Organizing Workshop. Yes, thank you. Okay. And I remember folks stating that we did not want diversity training. We wanted to learn how to change the systems that have created racism in the United States. And so, in the summer of 1993, a flyer was designed to advertise the workshop. We were the first organization to bring the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond workshop to New Jersey. So those in person can see the flyer back there on that list. I have another one here too. And Reverend Scott has it flashed on the screen for our virtual audience. So in the ensuing years, the Anti-Racist Alliance of New Jersey grew out of these efforts, and thus many more people took the workshops. We believe that there are about 3,500 people in New Jersey that have taken the training. I, like many others who've completed it, we say that it changed our lives. It put me firmly on the path of this anti-racist work. To have this congregation and team as my base, I am grateful. To say that I am a Ron Chisholm groupie is accurate. Ron Chisholm was the founder of the People's Institute. So 30 years ago, as an aspiring archivist, I saved things, and that's why I still have this flyer. And I also have other notes from the 1992 meetings, which are back there as well. So now I'm fortunately on the congregation's archives team, and that's been very convenient. So Reverend Scott and Anya told us last summer that we would be celebrating the 125th anniversary of UUCM throughout the congregational year, and we've been doing that. We've had various modes of sermons, classes, discussions. We also hope to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Undoing Racism team, as well as continuing the support of the People's Institute workshops, which are now offered online. So we will follow up with all the registrants online and send you information about how to attend those workshops, and people that are here in person have gotten a yellow flyer that talks about the relationship of the Undoing Racism team with the People's Institute and lists the dates. So it's wonderful to see the People's Institute principles in this book. They align well with the work of the Undoing Racism team and the work of the Undoing Racism team's congregational focus group. which is examining the racism within our congregation and the systems that support white supremacy, even among liberal Unitarian Universalists in New Jersey. Indeed, there's a reader's reflection box on page 43. And this query helps the reader to process what you're reading, right, into your own life and relate it to the UUA 8th principle. Now, I won't go into the 8th principle here. There's a lot of people here that are not Unitarians. But I'm just going to ask you, Google UUA and 8th principle and see how you can incorporate that into your life. Now, the reader's reflection box reminded me of when Annalise Scherfen, who's now chair of the Undoing Racism team, came to an Undoing Racism meeting and said, I need to meet with folks to process the then newly published White Fragility. So the Undoing Racism team formed a book discussion group and helped a lot of congregations to do that 2 years in a row. So 2 weeks ago, a different UUA longtime member came to Becky Doggett and I, Becky's back here. We were sifting through documents in the archives, and the person said, I'd like to form a book discussion group about the 1619 project. How do I do that? So stay tuned. All right. As we strive to become a beloved community, we commit to sustaining community for all. We need to live intentionally. We need to live an anti-racist life. The book, The Good Process for the Beginner Anti-Racist Person and Seasoned Activist. I hope you will consider purchasing it. I am now going to ask Rev Scott to give us a greeting on behalf of the congregation and a land acknowledgement. Thank you, Rev Scott.
Sure thing. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure beyond measure to be here. I'm going to be brief because we're here to hear from these amazing folks. I'm going to share just a couple of sentences from the opening of Notes of a Native Son by James Baldwin, which sort of grounds us in why we are here and will continue to be here for quite some time until racism is dismantled completely, which I believe is a very long-term project. I don't think that racism in America can be even discussed coherently without bearing in mind its context. Its context being the history, traditions, customs, the moral assumptions and preoccupations of the country. In short, our general social fabric. Appearances to the contrary, no one in this country escapes racism effects, and everyone in America bears some responsibility for it. And I just invite you all, as you're so moved, to join me in the spirit of prayer as I share these words from Patrice Curtis, a beloved colleague serving in the Washington, D.C. area, African-American colleague serving All Souls, D.C. Morning song. You, yes, you right there, you reading this, you are the spirit of the holy, the face of the sacred, your frail, strong human body, the universe manifest. I give my thanks for you. I turn my face and hands toward you to behold and to hold you. Precious. My kindness lays upon you and surrounds you, and when I fail, frail myself, I turn yet again and again to be gracious to you. I am inseparable from you for all time, from this life to the next and all that follows. It has been so, it is so, and it will be forevermore.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Rev Scott.
And now I will share our land acknowledgement. We share this with the congregation every Sunday to do our duty to make sure that we are aware of who we are and where we are and the deeper history upon which we're connected. The Unitarian Universalist congregation in Montclair occupies the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of the Lenni Lenape. We acknowledge the Lenni Lenape as the original people of this land and their continuing relationship with their territory. We also recognize the settler colonial genocide which attempts to erase them from history, as well as our obligation to counter this erasure with our words and with our actions.
Thank you. So now I'm going to introduce our speakers and our moderator. In the middle, we have Barbara Crain Major. She is a community organizer and trainer with over 40 years of experience in local, national, and international community development efforts. Her work includes assisting institutions in developing strategies to deinstitutionalize racism. She's a core anti-racist trainer for the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. And Barbara connects her local organizing to training in anti-racism with people who live in or work with struggling communities. She lives in New Orleans. Joseph Barndt, Reverend Joseph Barndt, is a retired Lutheran pastor, community organizer, teacher, and writer in the field of race and racism. He has been an anti-racist organizer for over 4 decades. Barndt has written several articles and books, including his 2 most recent books, Understanding and Dismantling Racism, The 21st Century Challenge to White America, and Becoming an Anti-Racist Church, Journeying Towards Wholeness, both from Fortress Press, as is the current book. He lives in Watsonville, California. And Marta Esquilin here works as a diversity expert and consultant with organizational and educational environments. At Rutgers University Newark, she is an associate dean of the Honors Living Learning Community and an assistant professor on the American Studies faculty. Marta's work raises awareness about how microaggressions operate to create hostile environments for people with marginalized social identities. She has developed training and assessment tools aimed at increasing cultural competence and addressing the impacts of microaggressions. I had the benefit of hearing her as a keynote speaker about 15 years ago at a professional higher education conference. Up until that time, I had never heard a speaker address so clearly and forcefully the concerns of the LGBTQ students as they experienced the higher ed environment. I just want to make a correction to a slide that was earlier here. It said that Barbara was only the author of this book, and that was incorrect. It's Barbara and Joe are co-authors of the book, so I wanted to make sure that is acknowledged.
Problems with my language, but I don't usually let folk monitor my language or my tone. You understand? I'm going to come at you respectful, but I'm coming at you. You understand? We got to have truth to each other. Don't speak truth to power. Hell, we don't speak truth to each other.
Yeah. Okay.
Practice a conspiracy of politeness. We got to love each other enough to know that we can sit down and have the hard conversations. We got to know that going in. We got to know we're going to make mistakes, and sometimes we're going to say hurtful things. But we got to know that we're going to stay there because we want a mission. We're going to stay with each other. And that's what Joe and I have been able to do over these years. Every now and then, I get on his nerves, every now and then. but we hanging in there and trying to write from our own perspective because that's what we did. And one of the things I appreciate about Joe in this book, see this book, half of this book is about society and the other half is about the church. But not because the church is the be-all, end-all. Our position is if you can deal with racism in the church, you can deal with it anywhere. You understand? But when it came to talking about the black church, Joe didn't take that on, I did.
Yeah.
And he knew, he respected enough to say, I can't do that. And I said, you're right, but I got to do that. And I don't call my folk out, I call them in. So now come on in now, we need to talk, we need to have conversation. So that's what this book is about, having conversation, but also giving some practical methods in terms of how we begin to do this work within our institutions and organizations. We took the church because that's where the good revenue is. We could have taken any institution, and I'll ask Joe to talk about that and his own experience. That's kind of who I am. Aren't I lovable?
Yes.
There was nothing about my life as I grew up as a Pennsylvania Dutch farm boy that prepared me for this work. My family was in the Klan. I was taught explicit racism. I went to seminary. The Klan wasn't there, but it was worse. because the seminary didn't address this issue or any issue that would put me on the right track. After seminary, I won a scholarship to go to Germany and study. And not knowing the slightest bit what I was talking about, I said I'm going to go and study the Holocaust. At least a little bit of something had gotten through to me that would ask the question, how could my people, the German people, do that to 6 million Jews? And so I arrogantly went to Germany and studied the Holocaust. The best thing in the world that happened to me was that Germany didn't talk to me except to send me back to study black people and black racism in the United States. The experience of studying the Holocaust was transformational for me. But what was really transformational was to come back here and to study racism from scratch. One of the wonderful things that happened to me during those years was meeting a woman by the name of Barbara Major. And Barbara Major and Ron Chisholm became friends and colleagues and tutors and leaders and correctors and whatever else I needed to bring about an organization called Crossroads Ministry. And I'll say one more thing about that and then I'll cut this short, but it was really important for me in relationship to the Unitarian Universalist Association is that during the early years of Crossroads Ministry, a couple of UUs by the name of Mel Hoover and Bill Gardner, some of you may know them,
Mel.
got mixed up with the life of Crossroads Ministry and taught me that the Crossroads Ministry had to be more than Christian. It had to be inclusive of the religious commitments and points of view of many groups, but it became pointedly part of the Unitarian Universalist Association, and so the UUs have played a great role as co-learners with me about racism in the early years. So I'll just stop there. There's a whole lot more, but the transformation of me from ignorant racist,
saving us.
going home, going to save black people. Told a man by the name of Stokely Carmichael said to me, "Go home and free your own people." And steadily, I drove out the demon and was blessed.
Wow.
That's enough for now.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you, yes.
Thanks,
So in the book, you start by asking a really critical question, important question, which is, why has progress toward ending racism been so difficult, slow, and unfruitful? And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about why you think that is.
I'll do a little bit, and Jill can do a little bit. Part of it is that we have never gone deep enough to examine what racism is and how deep it is within our systems and institutions. And so we identified what we consider the roots of racism in systems and institutions. That is racial identity, racialized history, and racialized culture. We've kind of skimmed the top of it, and we've had all these different movements. I spoke very briefly. When you look at racism is slick. You know, I think I say in the book, it'll put on a new outfit, new shade of lipstick, show up, and you think it's your friend. Like a lot of these social programs showed up in my community. I thought it was my friend. I didn't realize it distracted me from taking on, I'm thinking, because I'm socialized like everybody, it's either or. No, it's both and. I got to deal with the needs of my community, but I got to go deeper into institution. Then what it showed up as is, said, okay, y'all checking out this, y'all begin to ask some questions, because we were becoming clearer in the movement about racism. Mm-hmm. See, if I think back with the civil rights movement, I think back right after the Civil War, we look at these different movements. We had never gone deep enough to really identify that, in fact, every system, and I'm not saying everybody, but the majority of us, that every system in this country, bar none, was created originally, structured intentionally and legally to serve people called white exclusively. We had never gone that deep. And then we come up with this new thing called multiculturalism. And Joe is one of the ones that said, yeah, is it racist multiculturalism or anti-racist multiculturalism? All we saw was racist multiculturalism. That was the ones where, everybody wants to sit around the table and wear their particular outfit and bring a particular food, sing kumbaya, but white folks still controlling the power within the institution and organization. And we don't question it. Now they got a new one. It's called diversity, equity, and inclusion. Let me tell you something. Don't get it twisted. Because we say that DEI is where anti-racism go to die. Because I'm looking at the setup. Show you how it's set up around the country. They go get a woman of color. Yeah. Don't give her no money. You understand? No staff, no resource, no power. And tell her, now you supposed to diversify the organization. Well, what does that mean? Colorize it? Because that's different from really diversifying and going deep, saying, talking about sharing power, you know what I'm saying? Creating new methods of decision making, all of that. And we talk about that some in the book. Now, does that mean DEI workers are bad? Don't even go down that road. That means that DEI folk need to understand that they getting played if they don't understand what systemic racism is, and they're participating in maintaining white supremacy. That's what that's about. That's what that is about. So it's like, and I see it, and I'm going like, oh my God, folk are being set up. Because I didn't know I was being set up too, y'all. I didn't get this brilliant overnight. I didn't have my butt kicked so much and learning, and that's how it is. But what we say to folk is also understand there's no quick fix to this. None of us in this room created this mess we're in. Been around a long time. So we're not going to get out of it overnight. It's a long, not even having a common language. What's racism? Whatever I want it to be. One of the best ways to keep racism in place is everybody got their own definition of what it is. Yeah. And that's how we going about doing the work. So that we said that is the missing link, we call it, is deconstruction. Right. Because we keep talking about reconstruction, and we really believe that we're on the cusp of the third reconstruction in this country. The first after the Civil War, the Civil Rights Movement, and now the engagement and struggle around systemic and institutional racism. But we just need to know what we're doing. We need to be on the same page with the same language. We might do different things because there's no one way to get there. But at least we got to be clear that we're all seeing the same thing, understanding the same thing. We don't see the world differently. That's cool. But that's the missing link was if you don't deconstruct the racism that is inherent in every system, then you can't reconstruct an anti-racist culture and community.
That was so brilliant, I can't add anything to that. I would probably just say that the absence of deconstructing roots is the image. This is an image from Barbara. We spend our time cutting the flowers and making bouquets of our anti-racism and never touching the roots. And the roots go on and they develop new flowers, new directions. Racism keeps re-identifying, reconstructing itself, so that the reconstruction period, all that gets reconstructed is racism. And so the primary purpose of this book and the starting place is to understand that we have reconstructed racism and not reconstructed anti-racism. The most of our analyses of racism is individual bigotry, prejudice. We call that racism. And so we have a lot of individuals running around singing Kumbaya, making friends, and letting racism go stronger and stronger and stronger. And that's, so adding the word deconstruction to reconstruction becomes the basis for our talking about the transformation that can go to the roots of racism.
I just want to add one thing, that it's scary, but to me it's powerful to understand. I was checking out that racism was guiding and directing the anti-racist movement in this country. Now that's deep. That's deep. I'm like, whoa. Racism kind of telling us what to do, how far to go, how to do it, and we're not conscious of it because we don't know what racism is.
I wanted to focus a little bit more on the church, sort of more broadly, and the question is, how do you apply your analysis of race and racism in the church? And particularly, I was really interested in one of the points in the book about how you see the relationship between charity and justice.
There's 2 points that are really need to be lifted up about that. And one is that we chose the church as a model to be talking about systemic racism. But we could have chosen one of any 14 other systems. There are 14 basic mega systems that run our country. Education system, political system, economic system, religion system, social service system, and so forth. You can count, we count 14. Depends on your social theory whether you get 15 or 13, but we decided we didn't want to write a book about 14 systems. It was hard enough to get Barbara to write a book.
Right.
And so we had to decide on which one to use as a model. And Barbara one day said, when we were talking about it and looking at alternatives, she said, "Well, Reverend, it's up to you." So we chose the church because I come from the church. And we did not make a distinction in this book between, we just chose the Christian church. And did not, you'll find a few examples about the Unitarian Universalist Association, but the other religions, and we just wanted to focus on one subsystem, the Christian church. So the church is used as a model, and we say that if anybody reading this book can use that as a model to look at the other systems or the other subsystems. And we left to go with that. But for us, there was also another thing, and that is that our conviction that racism is above all, of all the evils of racism, it is above all a spiritual disease.
Ooh, Lord.
And that means that you got 14 systems to work on, but start with the spiritual underlining, destructive, demonic plague that was carried by the church.
That's right.
The church was the sponsor of racism, the
Yes, it
sponsor
was.
of slavery, the
Slave
sponsor of the degradation.
Beneficiary, yeah.
And only when we can own that by the church can we then talk about the fact that there's, in fact, two faces to the church. And one was the white Christian church owning slavery
Yeah,
with pleasure.
yeah,
But the other was the black church,
yeah.
which stood in opposition to racism, which has stood with all its faults. I'll let Barbara talk about the faults of the black church. But with all its faults, has been the leader, one of the major leaders of the opposition to racism in this country. And therefore, I've forgotten, I wondered so far for your question, I don't know.
No, it's perfect. So, no, so the question was just how you apply your analysis of race and racism in the church, and how do you see the relationship between charity and justice?
More than anything else, the church has always been explicitly pro-racist. But in times when it tried to slide between it and say that we love black people, we love people of color. But the church was substituting charity, so justice for charity, charity for justice. The primary religious conviction that dominates this country is that if we are against racism, we'll be charitable.
Right.
And if we look, and we'll also now since the civil rights movement, we'll let them in our church. And the theology of pronouns is very important. We will let them in our church if they behave themselves, if they concede power, if they leave their real life outside. And this is, I've learned from working with Unitarian Universalists that this is no different in any of our white denominations.
Yep.
That we allow people of color to become parts of our church, in our religious organizations. But we do that in order to keep things the way they are. And one of the sins, the greatest sins of all, is the teaching of our youth and our adults that charity is a substitute for justice.
Thank you. I know we are kind of right at our time for Q&A, but I did want to ask you both this question, which is, what is the role that people in the congregation can play in this movement now? What does the church offer to the movement? What's the call, as you see it, in this movement?
Joe can speak to that, and I'll be brief. Because, see, I think there's a different call between the black church and white churches. That it just is. And in the book, what I don't do is beat up on and kick out the black church. I know it got some issues. And somebody said, Barbara, you could have really talked about this church. I said, yeah, you write that book. See, because I understand the history of the black church. I understand the ones who won't do, never did, can't do. But I also understand that I look at some of the greatest, most prolific leadership in fighting this struggle for our liberation came out of the black church. Yes. And to this day, I understand that it is also a place where most of my people can still go for respite. Yeah. I get that. Yeah. And so the call for me for the black church is for them to stop mimicking the white church.
Say so. Say
you understand? Because they mimic theology, they mimic the racialized theology. Yes. They mimic when they really got to remember what they call to do. Now, I'm not a theologian. I'm just a little old black Baptist girl that somebody once called a communist because I want to feed children. I go like, no, I'm Baptist. I learned that in Sunday school. You understand? I don't know what that was. But the black church has to take its position of leadership in this movement for equity and justice and human rights for all people. You can't pick and choose. I want liberation for my people, but I don't care what happened to folk who are quit, who get. No, you can't go. There ain't no but between justice. If you want it for one, you gotta want it for all.
That's right.
Now, that's just, to me, that's just the way it is. So my call for the black church is to stand up and be counted in the movement for human rights and equity.
Yes.
You got to. Or don't call yourself a church. And one of the pastors that was a part of the meeting we had in New Orleans, and it was wonderful. And what Reverend Sanders said, he said, you know, Barbara, he said, I stand up all the time in the pulpit and I talk about, we got to fight racism. We got to resist it. He said, but never once did I say, we got to defeat it and destroy it. That's a different thing.
Yes.
So that's what I asked of my black church. And I'm saying black because that's who I am. I don't speak for other people of color because they got a story to tell, and I respect that they tell their own story.
That's right.
That I can't do that. However, what I'll say to my people, stand up and be counted. You know what you're supposed to be doing.
Yep.
You know. Don't act like you don't know, because I know you know.
And that question really opens up the question, what is the second half of this book about? What is we really expecting from the church or these other systems? The deepest you can find of church or any of the other approaches to systemic justice up until now is we make a distinction between transformational change and transactional change. Transactional change is picking the flowers. Transformational change is going to the roots.
Yes.
Transactional change is expecting everybody to be nice to each other and friendly racism.
That's right.
And transformational change is racism's got to die. Race has got to die. Race is racist.
Yes.
And every institution in this country that has made an inroad towards anti-racism, and I would suggest that you ask whether or not this applies to your church, to the Unitarian Association, or to, what's the name of this?
Congregate.
What's the name of your congregation?
Unitarian Universal Congregation of Montclair, UUCM.
Oh, UUCM. Whether it applies to you or not. But we have spent all of our time on transactional change with the deepest convictions of wanting to be right, with the deepest convictions of wanting to be anti-racist, with the deepest conviction of wanting to be a part of that front leadership group that's saying to the rest of the world, you can learn from us because we've been experimenting with anti-racism. None of us have gotten beyond transactional change. None of us have reached the point where we can be saying we've messed with the roots of racism. And that's what this call is about. That's what deconstructing racism is about. That's what adding deconstruction to reconstruction is about. We need to start with ourselves. The instincts of religion are to go out and help those in the world who need help. Everybody quotes Jesus about going out into the world and preach the gospel. This message is a little different. It says, go home first.
Say so.
Make yourself ready for that battle. Do the deconstruction of racism in your own system, in your own congregation, in your own synagogue, in your own church. And when you've gone deep enough to feel what it means to be engaged in racism in a fight to the death for transformation, then we can come together and say we're sharing an analysis, we're sharing a direction, we're getting ready for the third reconstruction. And the third Reconstruction doesn't have to be the failure that the first Reconstruction and the second Reconstruction were about. We can really threaten racism. And that'll be the day.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so we first want to, like, one question?
Yeah.
Okay, any questions from the audience?
Becky?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, you've been using the term racism and anti-racism. How do you equate that with white supremacy? Do you see it as the same, or what's the difference?
Racism produced white supremacy because racism is race prejudice plus systemic and institutional power. The whole idea of race, as Joe said, one day we got to get rid of race. The whole idea of race, made up, people still thinking it's real, created in the 17th, 18th century by Europeans, using themselves to model humanity, to assign human worth and social value for the purpose of white skin privilege and power. That was quick, that was fast, but it's real. So white supremacy and racism, because of the idea of race, it is white supremacy.
I know the woman in the back.
While you were talking, Mr. Brandt, I certainly saw Malcolm X.
I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
While you were talking about transformation, I certainly saw Malcolm X. It just suddenly entered my mind. When he went to Mecca, he changed.
Yeah.
When he came back, he was not the same. Because he recognized race does not exist, skin color does not exist. All of this is a hoax. And we know his story. He was, of course, one of my heroes. So as I'm sitting here, I feel like I'm sitting at his feet, listening to you. And I'm not just going to say Malcolm, but there were so many of them. And so I believe we are in transformation now. And I know I am struggling with this battle. So my only statement to you is, are we in transformation now? Are we into it? Because I feel like I'm ready. I can't do any more marching. Can't run from the mountaintops anymore. But I'm just saying, I believe we are in transformation. I know we see a lot of stuff happening. But I believe that. I wanted to know, what do you think? What is your thinking on that? Do we still have work to do?
There's lots more work to do. And I like what you said, in transformation. It's like people say, I hear organizations, we anti-racist. No, that might be an aspiration, but you haven't made it there yet. But you know what? Something you make me think. I love these because people make me think. What you make me think about is just the very fact that we're now in this country speaking of structural and institutional racism.
Yeah.
Means that we moved that far.
The bench.
Yeah, we moved that powerful inch. Because it moves from what Joe talked about, like the prejudice and biases and all that. And it's not to negate that we got to deal with that. But people say, I don't have a prejudice bone in my body. I tell them, baby, it ain't got nothing to do with your bones. You know what I'm saying? You cannot live in this society and not have prejudices. I'm not saying it's good, I'm saying it's real. But I like that I don't know how far in we are, but the very fact that we now say it, and let me tell you how I know we really in, the pushback.
Yeah.
So we hit them now because they coming at us.
Right.
They banning books and they doing this.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be doing that if we wasn't bugging them. You know what I'm saying? That to me is really for us to always understand that the hope is in racism's resistance to its elimination. That's hope too to me. It's like, oh yeah, if it was all cool, DeSantis would be sitting down somewhere in the palm tree. Well, apparently we're getting on your nerves. So I like that. I don't know. I know right now as institutions we're still at that transactional, but the fact that our language is changing now, and that shows growth and evolution of understanding the nature of what racism is and how it functions.
I know we wanted to take an
I'd
online.
add something to that. When we say that we inherited from the civil rights movement, a continued perpetuation of racism in the form of multicultural diversity and services. That's only part of the story. The other part of the story is we got this analysis of power from the Black Power movement.
Yes.
Yeah, we did.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we did.
And that was one of the greatest perpetuations of an analysis that came out of the civil rights movement. And it was thwarted by the FBI, it was thwarted by all the forces that were possible. But out of that came, in that period of 1970 to 1980, the germination of an analysis of racism based on the Black Power movement
Yes, sir.
that gave birth to a definition of racism as race prejudice plus the power of systems and institutions. And that has been generated down through the last 50, 60 years. While racism was thriving, there was another thing happening, and we believe that what we're proposing by our meager attempt to write something that's coherent, that we want to be making a contribution towards an understanding of racism that's rather of anti-racism that's transformational, and you can go to the roots. You can kill racism, and you can reconstruct. We can have the institutionalization of anti-racism. That's important. We talk about the institutionalization of racism, and that's really important. We haven't begun to reach into our roots to get that yet. But when we get it, there's something that can take its place, and that's the institutionalization of anti-racism. And that will be
Wow.
a wonderful new bed to be lying in.
Amen.
I know that there are questions. I think we're at the end of our time, but I just want to know, is there anything else that the two of you think is really important, that you want to leave, a message that you want to leave with the group today?
You gotta have hope. You gotta believe that change can happen. You know, you can get beat up in this and think that it won't. But I come from a people who only had a nickel and some nerve, and we survived the onslaught of the most powerful nation in this world, and we still standing. They tell me I ain't got no hope. It's like, don't you get tired? Yeah, I do. I know how to go sit my ass down somewhere and rest, because I know I gotta come back. But I will say, the peoples whose shoulders I stand on, the stuff they had to deal with, what I deal with is pudding.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine the horrendous stuff that they, so we gotta believe, y'all, that we can do this. We gotta know that, because if not, the people gonna feel it. So if we're not bringing hope to the communities, all of our communities, that the world can be different, that we are the ones to make it different, stay home.
That's it.
I'm with
Ain't for the faint.
And let me make a practical suggestion to look at what Barbara just said. When we I'm going to say this. Don't think we'll wait. Okay. Or is it at the end? I don't want to end it that way.
That's cool. We good. I know if people got their hands
Yeah.
burning. I know y'all got to go home. That's why we ending this right now, right? Oh yeah, yeah, I know that. Yeah. Y'all running this. See me, I'm just free flowing. It's like, long as people want to talk, I'm gonna talk. But I know I gotta catch a ride, right?
You have to sign books first.
Yes, I do. I have to do that.
So I think we'll end it here, and I'm going to just take a moment to thank our speakers, Barbara Crain Major, Joseph Barndt, And our moderator, really amazing, right? I mean, how often do you get a chance to see people like these in person, right? I also just want to thank Rev Scott and Rev Anya, the Anti-Racist Alliance folks who are here, who helped us kind of get introduced to this opportunity. Wendy, Ellie, Sylvia, Helen, Susan, Diane, everybody who's been helping out. Annalise Sherfin is here as chair of the Undoing Racism team. Thank you, Annalise, for being here. So we're going to sign off now online, and then I'm going to ask people to stay seated while we give some instructions about how the book signing is going to go. If you want to order the book, Fortress Press, and we will send a follow-up email to those who are registered online. Please be sure to take a look at it when we send it to you. It will have a lot of great information in it.
Okay.
So thank you.
Yes, let's give them a
So we're gonna,